Gretchen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. We have been fans of yours since the Happiness Project, and it's so fun to have you on to talk about the Four Tendencies. So, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be talking to you today.
I am someone who is a huge fan of personality typing
Mm.
systems, and I'm a sucker for the quizzes. I like those things. But you say right out of the gate that this is not an all-encompassing personality typing system. This is about one particular personality aspect. So I think before we jump in, maybe can you just tell us what the four tendencies are even trying to describe?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important point because I agree. I love a personality framework too, but I think that sometimes they try to describe too much. And so then you're like, well, some of it resonates with me and some of it doesn't. So it starts to feel a little bit baggy. Whereas this is really, the Four Tendencies really looks at one very specific aspect of your nature, which turns out to be incredibly significant and helpful, but it just tells you that one thing. So what it's looking at is how you respond to expectations, which sounds super boring, but ends up being very juicy. And we all face two kinds of expectations. So there's outer expectations like a work deadline. And then there are inner expectations like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution. And so the Four Tendencies divides people into upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels, depending on whether they meet or resist outer and inner expectations. But like you say, sometimes people are like, well, all creative people are rebels, or all rebels are like teenagers, or all journalists are questioners. No, you don't know how creative they are, how extroverted they are, how sort of civic minded they are. All you know is how they'll respond to an expectation. If you ask or tell them to do something, or if they ask or tell themselves to do something, how are they likely to respond? That's all it tells you, but it turns out that tells you a lot.
And I think the thing that I am a sucker for personally is developmental frameworks. So like how
Hmm.
people mature and as time moves on, how things change. And from what I understand, this is also distinct from that. Is that correct, Gretchen?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the genetic roots of personality in many respects, and I do think that people bring their tendency into the world with them. Like if you know what to look for, you can see the tendencies in very, very young children. But it's also true that with time and experience, people learn to manage the strengths and weaknesses of their tendencies better. So it's not like you're stuck in a certain pattern of behavior, but I
Mhm.
don't think you grow from one to another the way you might in other kinds of frameworks.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe give us you listed them, but maybe give us a little more about each tendency.
Okay. Okay, and so I'm going to explain these really quickly. And if people want to take a quiz that will give them a result, they can go to gretchenrubin.com/quiz and take it for free. It's short. I think like 1.3 million people or something have taken this quiz. But the fact is, these are super easy to spot. Once you
Yeah.
know what to look for, you will see them in your family. You will see them in your friends and coworkers. You can see them on the Game of Thrones. You can see them on The Office. Like they're very easy to spot once
Yeah.
you know what to look for. Okay. So it's whether you meet or resist outer and inner expectation. So upholders are the people who readily meet both outer and inner expectations. So they keep the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them and meet those expectations, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. They tend to be they love scheduling. They love to-do lists. They tend to not need a lot of supervision. They can be very focused on accountability. They can also get kind of rigid because like once they have a plan in their mind, like they want to execute on that. I say that as an upholder myself. Um, and so their motto is discipline is my freedom. Then there are questioners. Questioners are people who have to know why. They need reasons, justifications. They're making everything an inner expectation. If something makes sense to them, they will do it no problem. If it doesn't make sense to them, they will push back. They tend to be very focused on efficiency. They love data. They can sometimes fall into analysis paralysis. It can be hard for them to move forward if they can't get perfect information. So their motto is I'll comply if you convince me why. Then there are obligers. This is the biggest tendency for both men and women. This is the one that the biggest number of people belong to. So you either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. Obligers are the people who readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And you can spot an obliger when they say things like, Why is it that I can't always keep my promises to other people, but I can't keep my promises to myself? And sometimes they think this is because they lack self-esteem, or they're lazy, or they can't set priorities, or they can't learn to put themselves first. But no, the solution for the obliger is outer accountability. Obligers need outer accountability even to meet an inner expectation. So if you want to exercise, you would exercise with a friend who gets annoyed when you don't show up, exercise with your dog who gets disappointed if she doesn't get to go for a run, pay a trainer, raise money for a charity, think of your duty to be a role model for someone else. There's a million reasons and ways that we can create outer accountability once that is what you know you need. It's not enough to have an inner expectation. You have to have outer accountability as an obliger. They make great leaders, great team members, great family members, great friends, because they are the people that go the extra mile. But they're frustrated because they're not keeping their promises to themselves. So their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then finally, rebel. So if obliger is the biggest tendency, rebel is the one that the fewest number of people belong to. And rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they choose to do. They can do anything they want to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically they don't tell themselves what to do. Like they don't sign up for a 10 a.m. yoga class on Saturday because they think, I don't know what I'm going to want to do on Saturday. And just the idea that someone is expecting me to show up is going to annoy me. So their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. So these are the four tendencies. And then once you know the tendencies, then there's all different kinds of ways that you can use your tendency to get yourself or someone else to do something that you want, or not to do it. Because that's, I think, the great challenge of adulthood is, how do I get myself to do what I want? And how do I get you to do what I want? You know? And the tendencies are great for that. But I'm very curious. What do you know? I'm an upholder. Do you know what your tendencies are?
Yeah, obliger.
Okay, so you're an obliger. So that's good, because you're then of your audience, like many of your audience, that will resonate. What your point of view is their point of view. And how about you, Tim?
I'm an upholder.
You're an upholder.
Yes. Self-discipline, that kind of thing has always been very, very important to me. In addition to my desire to comply with outside expectations.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm glad that you both found it pretty. I know I wrote a whole book about the four tendencies, and I'm like, but people know what they are pretty quickly, and you can start spotting it around in people around you, because once you know what to look for, it's pretty obvious, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's certainly obvious to me. I can ask people if they're like, you'll never figure out what I am. I'm like, I'll ask you two questions, and I'll have a pretty good idea. Yeah.
So, and you said, by the way, so obligers are the most common, rebels are the least common. Do upholders and questioners make up sort of the same amount of the rest of the pie?
No, so obliger is the biggest tendency, and then questioner. So if you're thinking about a curriculum, or you're dealing with clients or students, or whatever, you want to think most people are probably going to be obligers and questioners. Upholders and rebels are the smallest tendencies. They're like the extreme personality types. And I remember when I came up with the four tendencies, I went to my husband. I was like, do you know what? I'm like a fringe extreme personality type. And he was like, oh, you think? He was not surprised, right? Right, Tim, there is an intensity to upholders and rebels that I think people really feel. As upholders, we feel it, and rebels, they feel it too. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, so tell us how you started observing that this is a lens that really affects your life.
So I was writing a book called Better Than Before that was all about how people can make or break their habits. And I was looking at all the different strategies that people use. Because I don't, when you read about habits, often people will be like, well, here's the one way to do it. Start small. Or here's and I would always think, well, that works for some people, but it doesn't work for other people. And so in Better Than Before, I wanted to find all the strategies that somebody could use, because some strategies work for just about everybody, like the strategy of convenience. But then some strategies really work for some people, but not other people at all, like the strategy of abstaining, which is a strategy that works really well for me, but some people don't like the strategy of abstaining at all. Some strategies we can use only at certain times of our lives, like the strategy of the clean slate, which is when we go through a big transition. So I was trying to figure out like all the different things that would work for people, and like under what conditions certain certain things would work and certain things would be less successful. And I just started noticing patterns that I couldn't figure out, and yet they felt connected to me. And this was the most intellectually challenging thing that I've ever done because I was groping my way towards something that I didn't know what it was. I felt that certain things were connected, but I had no idea why. So, for instance, I was at a cocktail party and I was talking to a woman and she said, "Oh, what's your book about?" And I said, "Habits." And she literally took a step back from me. Like she recoiled in horror. And she said, "Oh my God, why would you want to write a book about habits? What an awful subject." And I thought, well, that's a different way to look at the world because I think habits sound amazing. This is super energizing and freeing. I think everybody should have tons of habits. So it's like, wow, she sees the world in a completely different way. Then, because I was asking people about their habits, I would say to people, how do you feel about New Year's resolutions? And a certain group of people would say to me, well, I would keep a resolution when it makes sense to me. But I would not keep a resolution on January 1st because January 1st is an arbitrary date. And I thought, what is it about it that these certain group of people say exactly the same thing? Because the arbitrariness of January 1st never mattered to me. And then there was the most important moment when I really the thing that really got me going was when I was having lunch with a friend. My sister calls me a happiness bully because I can get really insistent if I think there's a way to make you happier. So I was quizzing her about her exercise habits. And she said to me, the weird thing is I know I'm happier when I exercise. And when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? And I thought, well, why? Why? What is different? I could think of so many things that are different, but why? And this is why I was thinking about all these things. And suddenly I was sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in right now. And it just leaped out at me, expectation. And I realized that's what the core of it. My friend on the track team, when she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she showed up, no problem. When she tried to go on her own, she struggled. The questioners are like, January 1st is an arbitrary date. If something's important to me, why would I wait till January 1st, right? Arbitrary. That's a big sign of questioner.
Yeah.
And then the rebel, they don't want to be chained. They don't want to be held. They want to choose. And so it was trying to figure out all those things that came together with understanding that expectation was really at the heart of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, what in your mind, could you talk a little bit about the overarching goal in the sense of like why would it be helpful for me to know, for example, that I'm an upholder, or even to know about people that I am in close relationship with? Like, what are we getting at here?
Well, that's the key question, right? Because like, what is the point of all this? And the point is to have a happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative life. And the thing is, a lot of times we know perfectly well what would make us happier, and yet we're having trouble following through with it. And so I say that I want to read more. Why am I not reading more? Like, what can I do that will help me read more? Or I'm frustrated because I keep asking my spouse to do something and they won't do it. Why? And then if you understand the tendencies, you can be much more, you're not just throwing spaghetti against the wall. You can set yourself up for success. Like I remember I got an email from somebody who said, I don't understand it. When I was on my mission, I was exercising, I was reading scripture, I was like up and about, I was getting everything done. I was living my best life. And now I'm home and I thought this is amazing. And I'm doing nothing. What is it?
Yeah.
Well, it was the companion. It was the accountability, right? It's like, she's like, if I had a companion with me all the time, I would be amazing. But what she hadn't understood was so how do you give yourself that accountability?
Yeah.
Now you know what the missing piece is, because otherwise you might think like, well, maybe what I really need to do is just get more motivated. I just need to sit here and think about how important it is to me to do whatever. It's like, you're not going to motivate yourself into this. You need to figure out how to give yourself what you need.
Yeah.
Or you might get frustrated. Like I'm very inflexible, right? Because upholders get an idea in their head and it's very hard for them. And so it's helpful for me. Like I can say to the people around me, it's hard for me to be flexible. Like I make a plan. It's hard for me not to want to really stick to that plan. So give me a heads up. If things are going to change, let me know so I can kind of wrap my head around it in advance, or else I'm going to get super flustered and probably kind of uncooperative and crabby.
Okay, this is so interesting. I think the most powerful part of the book for me was realizing that I really resist this obliger tendency. Like there is definitely a part of my brain that is positive that the upholders are the gold standard. Like
Mm,
I should be able to just
mm,
be
yeah,
equally accountable to my inner
yeah.
expectations as I am to outer expectations. So I really cycle through this like the shame of not having just made a decision and then kept my word to myself. And so it was such a different way to think about it that I can actually understand this and use the tendency to create some accountability that will actually work. But for everybody who is not an upholder,
Yeah.
how is it not the gold standard? It seems like the right way. It seems like ideally we're all just 100% accountable to ourselves and the people around us, and we can just check that box perfectly.
Yeah, this is one of the things I'm so glad that you brought that up, because obligers often do feel like I shouldn't need this. These are like
Yes.
training wheels that I should be able to take off. If I were really an adult, I wouldn't need to rely on this. And other tendencies are better. But the
Yeah.
fact is, none are better and none are worse. All include people who are wildly successful and also people who struggle. You're the biggest tendency. Like you're in huge company. Oprah was is an obliger. Andre Agassi is an obliger. I mean, there's
Wow.
just obligers all over the place. Um, that are wildly successful and respected. And this idea that there's something immature about
Yeah.
needing outer accountability. It's
Yes.
just it's just what you need. It's like there's nothing wrong with it. Just get yourself the outer accountability and you'll be able to do anything that you set your mind to. You can achieve your aims. And there's so many ways. Once you understand that you need outer accountability, there's so many ways to get it. And there's no reason to think like, and sometimes people are like, well, I'll give myself the outer accountability, but then I'll like grow out of it. Or like,
Yes.
you always need that outer accountability, and that is
Yeah.
fine. There
Yeah.
is nothing wrong with it. Obligers are the rock of the world. They're the type O. They are the type that pairs up the most successfully with all the other three. There's huge strength in the obliger tendency. And so to me, it's like, get yourself what you need to succeed and thrive in what your aims are, rather than saying like, well, I should be different, because
Yeah.
there's plenty of downsides to upholders and plenty of downsides to questioners and rebels, as well as upsides.
Yeah.
We can all learn from each other.
Yeah.
I think this is what made me especially interested to talk to you about this on the podcast because in our faith community, a congregation is going to be full of the
Yes.
whole spectrum.
Yes, it
And
is.
so yeah, so it was wildly fascinating to imagine. I mean, it was like things were popping into my mind where I've had interactions with people that now I have a little bit more language for. Like it makes sense that we're approaching the same task with different tendencies, and so
Oh,
we're going to
give an
show up
example.
differently. Well, okay, so in our community, we take turns basically leading the congregation. So
Sure.
you'll get a calling. Years ago, I was in charge of girls' camp. And so all
That's
the young
big.
women come
That's
together.
big.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just a few days. You plan activities and you camp together and it's really fun. But like you come together to create this experience with maybe a dozen other women. And you have some people who it's filling them up to just get really creative and pour their whole heart and soul into this and some who I think show up with a little bit of resentment, like this is a big, huge ask. And so it can be really tricky to navigate what feels like relationships, but I think the expectation feels different to everybody right out of the gate.
Well, 100%. But then you can imagine that you have the person who's like, well, why are we doing it for 3 days? I think it would make more
Exactly.
sense to do it for 5 nights. And like, I don't understand, like, why are we doing it for this age group? Or like, I don't and you're
Yes.
like, why are you slowing me down? I'm just trying to get things crossed off the list. I got a million things to do. I can't sit around and like analyze everything. And then,
Yeah.
so then somebody makes a mistake and says, well, we've always done it this way. And then a questioner is like,
Yes.
well, that's totally unacceptable. Now we just got to
This
stop
is
everything and
spooky
talk.
and accurate. Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah. And then the rebel is like, okay, fine. Well, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing. And everybody's like, wait, what? Like, we had a whole schedule here. Like, you can't, like, now just spring karaoke night on us, like, out of nowhere. Like, what's up with that? No, you can understand, like, but the thing that's helpful is you see, it's sometimes people are like, you're being inconsiderate. Like,
Yes.
why aren't you getting with the program? Why are you ignoring me? Why are you
Mhm.
making this so hard? Instead of understanding like, oh, we all just bring a different perspective. We
Yeah.
don't have to take it personally. It's like, okay, it's really important for you to understand why all these decisions are being made. So maybe I need to slow down and take some time and explain to you, well, you know what, all this has been very carefully thought out. You weren't part of that discussion, but over the years, what we have found is that this is what works the best. And I'm going to explain it to you because you need to know why. And you have to be
Yes.
confident that decisions have been made thoughtfully. And that this isn't just people doing something out of routine and rote and it makes no sense and we're all wasting our time and energy on something that doesn't make sense. Once I have the confidence that you're being thoughtful about it, I can get on board. But
Yeah.
like if you're the obliger who's like, oh my God, I just need to get these things done, that can feel like a waste of your time. It can feel like somebody undermining your authority or questioning your judgment. They feel like they're being helpful. You feel like they're being
Mhm.
obstructionist. But once you understand, like, questioners just do that. They just
Yeah.
question. And I just need to like give them the information that they need. Then they can get on board and then they're unstoppable. They just need to know why.
Mm.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah, and
total
it feels like
sense.
that's one of their gifts, right? That like if we can see it not as a threat, then it really is a gift to have somebody who can't help but see it any other way and
No,
really ask the question.
they're the ones that save the rest of us from wasting our time, energy, and money in doing something that doesn't make any sense or that's completely outmoded. Or somebody's like, hey, this was the original purpose of girls' camp, but we've kind of drifted away from what we were trying to achieve. Let's step back and think like,
Yeah.
are we achieving what we want? Instead of just like saying, hand me the sheet, hand me the
Yeah.
clipboard, and off I go. It's a huge, I mean, I'm married to a questioner, so I feel the pros and cons of this very keenly. But no, but it is, you have to see that they are
Mhm.
adding value, even if in the moment, sometimes you're like, okay, this person is just asking too many questions. And that's
Yeah.
the sign of a questioner. You say, are you told that you ask too many questions? And usually they're like, oh yeah, I've been told that since grade school. You know, it's like, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I'm curious too if you wouldn't mind diving a little bit more into maybe some of the downsides
yeah,
of being an upholder or just
sure.
of upholders in general. I think a lot of people, especially in the context of faith communities, and like ours in particular, where I think it is very often true that upholders are elevated into positions of authority.
Yes.
We very much do like sort of loyalty company people, and
Yep.
and people that have complied with those outer expectations tend to be
Thrive.
elevated into those positions.
Yep.
And it's, I think, simultaneously true, like you said, that the majority of the people in our congregations are obligers who may share Aubrey's feeling that they should be upholders, but they're sort of like beating themselves up for not being upholders. So I'd be
Yeah.
curious if we could talk a little bit more about those downsides.
Yeah.
About the downsides of upholders. Well, one
Yeah.
thing is that upholders can experience tightening. This is a downside for upholders themselves.
Mm.
Tim, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but this is when the rules get tighter and tighter and tighter. So, like, I'm one of these people who eats very low carb. I just really don't eat sugar or any kind of carbs. And when I started, I was pretty strict about that. But over time, I've gotten much stricter. And that's fine. I think that that's healthy, but sometimes it can get overwhelming, and you can start being kind of choked by your own red tape and your own bureaucracy. Um, Also, one thing you want to be very, and I think this might really be important for your community, which is sometimes people who are not upholders will kind of throw out a rule thinking, well, people will kind of take this under advisement, or maybe they'll take it like
Mm.
75%. And they don't realize to an upholder, it's like, whoa, that just lodged in my
Wow.
brain. I'm going to be doing that 100% for the rest of my life. You got if you it's like if you have an upholder child, you have to be really, really careful about saying something like, oh, you should be able to get straight A's every year, right? Because your child is going to be like, oh, okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. They can really glom onto something and hold it too tightly, and the
Wow.
tightening can become very choking.
Wow.
Another thing, and I say this as an upholder, upholders can be judgmental because things come pretty easily to them that other people struggle with. And to an upholder, it's just like, I don't understand it. Like, we've talked about this 10 times. Deal with, like, just make a plan, put it on the calendar, and get it done. I don't understand, I don't want to be your babysitter, just like, and it was really enlightening for me as somebody who's writing a book about habits, understanding like, well, this is why I'm writing a book about habits, because this is the kind of thing upholders are good at. I didn't understand why other people were struggling. Because if you feel like resisting every time somebody asks or tells you to do something, or if you resist every time something doesn't seem to make sense, Or if you have a lot of trouble meeting an inner expectation, well, then all kinds of situations are going to be harder for you than they would be for the upholder. And so it's really important for upholders to understand why other people might struggle in a situation that they themselves would not find to be particularly difficult. And so it's like a way to have more compassion. Like
Yeah.
there's a coldness to upholders. I mean, there's a coldness to it.
Yes.
And it's also sometimes like, well, you would like to have my help, but I got my own thing that I got to do, and so I can't help you because I have to do my thing. So that's another thing. So those are
Wow.
some of the downsides of upholders. I don't know, Tim, does that ring true for
That
you?
resonates so much. I mean, those
Okay.
first, yeah, those first two, I mean, the tightening, for instance. So like, I was
Yeah.
thinking there were two experiences on my mission that came immediately to mind. So I did, I was a Mormon missionary
Oh,
for
where were
2
you a
years.
mission? Where
I
was your
was in
mission?
Uruguay, so down in
Oh,
South America. Yes,
I've been
it was
there.
very cool.
Yes.
But the first thing that came to mind was there was a visiting leader who came to our, like one of the very like top leaders in our church. He came
Sure.
down to South America and he gave like a big area conference. And so
Sure.
all the missionaries, like hundreds, maybe even thousands, were either tuned in via broadcast or like in this auditorium with him. And he said that we should be contacting 20 people a day aside
Okay.
from the door knocking. Okay. Yes, you know where I'm
Okay.
going.
It's like, okay,
Yes.
your mind is blown.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And so to me, I took that extraordinarily seriously. And we did start tracking separately, aside from door knocking, which isn't so much a thing today as it was back then, but like how many people we would contact a day. And I was also one of the missionaries who was tasked with tracking the numbers of other missionaries. And so I started immediately
Yeah.
contacting 20 people a day. And that's actually very difficult
Yeah,
if
sure.
you think
Sure,
about
sure,
it.
sure.
Meaning you're passing someone on the street and it's like, hello, like, could you have a
Yeah.
second? It's like, and as an introvert, in addition
Yeah.
to being a holder,
Sure.
very, very difficult work. And so we're logging those 20 a day and it's so hard. But I start, gathering these numbers and people are turning in, we did 4, we did 6 or whatever. I'm like, what, like, why am I the
No,
only one doing?
because a
Yeah.
questioner would say, there's no magic in the number
Yeah.
20.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow.
That's kind of like, I'll just make my best effort,
Yep.
and they're able to say like, well, why 20? He didn't say anything about why 20.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And so, and an obliger might say, well, it's interesting that you were tracking it because an obliger might say like, well, no one's checking, so I won't feel
Yeah.
obliged to do it. But if they know you're checking, then they might
Yes.
feel a
Yeah.
lot of
That's a good
obligation to
point.
do it. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I also earned the nickname. Well, I don't know if it was a full nickname, but there were some people who referred to me as a Pharisee on my mission because I was so into the rules. And like I
There
didn't
you go.
I didn't take that as praise necessarily, but I was like, you know what? If obedience looks like that to you, then I can't help you. That was kind of the perspective that I had. So it was
But
very, very interesting. Go
but
ahead, Gretchen.
it's a strength and a weakness.
Yes.
If there's a rule, it gets in your head. And so I do think that it's helpful to understand like why am I the way I am? Why am I responding the way I'm responding?
Yeah,
And
totally.
why are other people, because you might be a very judgmental, well they're just not committed, like they're just
Yeah.
instead of
Hmm.
being like, well, to them they're like 20 is just like what do you mean by 20,
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious too, and I've mentioned this on a couple of the previous podcast episodes, but after my mission, I was diagnosed with OCD, and it actually explained. I think for me, the rule following became it definitely became compulsive, in a lot of ways to the extent that for me it was clinical. I'm not sure if that's. I mean, I'm not sure if that's on the same spectrum or if it's something completely different than what we're talking about. Like if upholders tighten too much, maybe it's OCD, or maybe that's, like I said, a different plane.
Well,
Uh,
it's interesting because I know I would never comment on that because I don't have
yeah.
the expertise to talk about OCD. But I will say that other people have said that, and many people have asked me whether there's a relationship
Mm.
between rebel and
Mm.
ADHD.
Oh,
Oh,
interesting.
Because they're like,
wow.
is that, or do they go together? Are they somehow, and I'm like, I don't know. And I wouldn't be able to analyze that just because I don't have the
Yeah.
expertise. But I will say that sometimes, and maybe it's all kind of vocabulary also in how we are describing our
Yeah.
behavior and looking for patterns in our behavior. Um, so yeah, so that's, but
Yeah.
or so
Yeah.
you might say like to some extent I can control my OCD symptoms, but in some way it's just kind of like It's kind of my upholder nature as
Mhm.
well.
Yep. Makes total sense.
Okay, so of the four types, it feels like rebels maybe are the easiest, at least in a community setting, to pin the downside. I think that, at first glance, you're going to think of the things that are hard in a community setting about a rebel. So, can you talk about the upside of a rebel? What's a gift, especially in a
Oh,
group setting
in a group
of a
setting.
rebel? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, the wonderful thing about rebels is they are so free. So they can think outside the box.
Yeah.
They can see a different way. They don't feel confined by the way things have always been done. And they're very, very authentic and true to themselves. And there's enormous power and energy and charisma in that.
Mm,
But you're right. It is. I would say the thing about the rebel tendency is it's the most misunderstood tendency because being a rebel it's more different than upholders, questioners, and obligers. Like those are kind of more alike, and rebel is the more
yeah.
different. So in the book, The Four Tendencies, rebel is the one that has the fewest number of people in it, but it's the longest chapter in the book because it needs the most explanation. But one of the things to remember about rebels is like when they're very motivated by identity. So they will do anything that it allows them to express their identity. So if they're like, I'm a faithful person, anything that goes with being a faithful person, they will eagerly do because it's part of their faith. It's like that's what it is because that's what they want to do. That's what they choose to do. And there's power in that. And so part of when, if you are dealing with a rebel or you're a rebel yourself, appeal to identity is one of the most powerful ways to bring behavior to shape behavior. Because maybe you're a faithful person, maybe you're an artist, maybe you're a responsible leader maybe you're a good listener, maybe you're an animal
Mm,
lover, you're an environmentalist. All these identities carry with them action. And once you have that identity as a rebel, they'll follow. And so one of the things to do with a rebel is to make explicit, well, what I'm asking for you is actually you can choose to do it because it's an expression of your identity, but you don't tell them they have to do it. You don't tell them they must do it. You say, well, you could choose to do it if
yeah.
this is your identity. And then they'll be like, well, yes, that is my
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah. Okay. That totally makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
One more indulgent obliger question. But
Oh, yeah.
this concept of obliger burnout and rebellion was so
Yes.
interesting to me. And it also feels like the hardest to navigate in real life. It resonated with me in a visceral way. Like I have lived
Mm,
this over and over and over again. So I'd love for you to just explain what that is. But also I think my real question is, it seems like for obligers to avoid this experience of complete burnout or rebellion, they have to learn how to throttle their yeses and their nos. And I think that my question is how to tell when you're already in burnout and so the no is just spewing out of you and when
yes.
it's coming from this healthy place and it's a good boundary that's not coming from exhaustion necessarily.
Absolutely. I'm so eager to talk about Obliger Rebellion, and I want to hear your examples of Obliger Rebellion because I think that would be really helpful. So just to explain what Obliger Rebellion is. So obligers are people who readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So Obliger Rebellion is when an obliger like meets an expectation, and then suddenly they snap and they say, "This I will not do." And sometimes it's kind of small and funny. Like I've talked to many people, I don't know why they all do this. They will deliberately sit in their cars to be late for work on purpose in the morning, or it's like, I'm just not going to answer your emails for 2 weeks. So that's small. But sometimes it's huge. I'm going to end a 30-year friendship. I'm going to quit my job today. I'm walking out of here today. Um, the problem with the Blighter Rebellion is that it's explosive. It's not under the control of the obliger. They themselves will often say, I'm acting out of character. I don't know. I don't recognize myself. And they often will use metaphors of explosion, volcanoes erupting, uh, lids being blown off of pots. It feels overwhelming and uncontrolled. And the fact is, it can have reputational consequences because suddenly there's an explosive action and the people around you are like, what's going on? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I say one comment to my daughter, the bride, and now she's refusing to talk to me. It's like that I say one thing. It's like, oh, I don't think that's one thing. I think that's obliger rebellion. Or
Yeah.
I don't understand why you're so mad. I asked you if you were willing to be on this committee and you said fine. So like, why now are you having throwing such a tantrum? But if you know about obliger rebellion, you can see it coming. The
Okay.
building resentment, the building anger, people starting to act out of character. Like somebody will say, oh, I always loved my job, but lately I found myself like doing online shopping for a couple of hours in the middle of the workday, right? That's a big red flag, right? What are
Okay.
you doing? That's a minor rebellion. And that's foreshadowing that a big rebellion is coming. And this is when you know to look for it, there are examples of obliger rebellion everywhere. I mean, the
Yeah.
most famous one probably is It's a Wonderful Life. That movie is the story of Obliger Rebellion. He meets expectations, and then suddenly he snaps. Um, 27 Dresses, there's an Obliger.
Mm,
It's very, very common.
Mm.
So I would love
yeah.
to hear, Aubrey, like what are some examples of Obliger Rebellion in
Well,
your life?
Aubrey, when you brought
It,
up girls' camp, I thought you were going to talk about the time that we literally moved out of Obliger Rebellion.
Oh, I want to hear that.
we literally moved. Like,
Okay. See,
this is
it
such a
can be big.
confession.
This is the thing. It
This
can be a
this
very big
It
change.
was so big, and this was years and years ago, but
Oh,
it was
and let me just say, it's meant to be beneficial. It's meant to
yeah.
protect the obliger when expectations get too.
Wow.
That's what but it
Yes,
doesn't
it
always
did.
do that, but that's what it's supposed
Yeah.
to protect you. Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. We were living in a place where our neighborhood was basically how many apartment buildings, Tim? Like 14 apartment buildings.
Yeah, it
Like
was like
just
hundreds of
it
apartments.
was
Yeah.
really transient. Like people were moving in and out. Like every month there would be multiple move-ins and move out. And so between church and the elementary school, I just felt like they were draining the life out of me. Like
Yeah.
because I couldn't say no. So it was, and the hard thing was there were so many legitimate asks. Like there were so many people who legitimately needed help. I felt obligated
Right.
in every single context of our life for those
Yes.
few years. And it was like one particular summer there was there was a girls camp ask, there was a youth conference ask, there was a PTA ask, and I literally it was like overnight. It was like somebody just like cut a tight rope, and we moved. I was like, I am out. We have to move by June 26th because that's the first event, and I am not doing any of this. And I started meeting with realtors, and I think we had moved in like 3 weeks.
No,
Like I didn't
I
care
was
where we
going to
went.
work. I
We
didn't even go look at the houses. She found one and she's like, "Hey, I got one." And I was like, "Okay, cool.
and we
I'll
we
take a look
like
at it with
picked
you."
up and
And then we
left.
lived there
Okay,
for
can I
seven
just
years.
say
We
that is
lived
the
there for
most
7 years. Like
that is the
yeah,
most amazing example of obliger rebellion that I've ever heard, which is just like the only way out is to just move to a
yes,
different place.
run away. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a perfect example of obliged rebellion, which is like your expectations are growing and growing and growing. It feels like there is no way to say no. There's no way to
Mhm.
lighten the load. And here's the thing, and this is very evident from your example. Obligers feel exploited and taken advantage of, and
Mhm.
100% they are. Upholders, questioners, and rebels all take advantage of obligers because obligers are the rock of the world. They are the people who are the most likely to say yes if somebody else asks them to go the extra mile or to lend a hand. And this is why they are so valuable. I've had employers tell me that they want to screen for obligers so that they only hire obligers, right? It's an
What?
incredibly powerful thing, but right, it's like maybe it was fine to move, but maybe you would rather have stayed where you were and figured out how to manage it, or like
Yeah.
understood how to be aware of this sense that this was
Mhm.
escalating beyond your control before it got to that. And that's a perfect example of like it often can lead to very dramatic action.
Yeah. So what is the solution there? Like, is it, when you're in a situation, if you're an obliger and you
Yep.
notice resentment, like you notice a legitimate ask, you notice the feeling of obligation, and you notice the accompanying resentment, like,
Yes.
is that where you take action before
Yes.
it
Yes.
snowballs? Okay.
Yes. Okay. And this is much harder than it sounds. So, which I completely acknowledge. So, you really want to be on the lookout for the storm warnings and to start to notice if you're feeling this in yourself or if you're seeing it in someone else. And so here are some things to think about. One is if you're in a like in the setting that you're finding yourself, maybe other people can look out for each other. Like there's a lot of obligers. So start saying things like, "Hey, why is this person being asked to do this, this, and this? Like that's too much." So sometimes an obliger is reluctant to speak out for themselves, but they're very willing to protect others.
Mm,
And so part of it is to look out for other people and to all sort of protect each other from being taken advantage of. Like, why is this person being asked to do so much? It's too much. And so look out for other
yeah.
people. Another thing is to say, well, if I say yes to you, I have to say no to someone else. Because often with an obliger, like if something is presented as an outer expectation, it's very hard for them to say no. And they don't want to be put into a position where they have to say no to somebody, but that's what
Yeah.
works. So like if you sit
Yes.
down with your family and you say, look, what's really important to me is that I'm home at 6:30. This is really important to us in our life as a family. And so I need to say no to anything that means that I can't do that. And then if somebody says, can you do this? You will say, well, I have to say no to someone. Am I
Yeah.
going to say no to you or am I going to say no to my family? And then also, once you know about Obliger Rebellion, you can think, and it's not just something that you're saying, it's actually true. I have to say no to you here because otherwise I might walk away entirely. You might lose all of my support. Okay, what happened in your ward? It's like you left, right? They
Yeah.
drove you out, not meaning to, because it's like, if I don't watch out for myself, I will not be able to serve at all. And
Mm,
so it's like, the whole thing about putting your own oxygen mask on, it's a cliche because it's true. And so sometimes in Obliger, it's like if I feel myself getting to that point and I don't want to abandon you, I don't want to drop the ball altogether. I don't want to have some kind of explosive thing happen. And so I'm going to have to say that I can't do this. And it
yeah.
also is really helpful to talk to someone else. Like before you say yes to something, go especially to a questioner. Like I'm married to a questioner, so I'm like, should I do this? And my husband's like, why would you do that? Or like
Wow.
or anybody where you're talking through how is this going to play out and not feel like, oh, everything is a burden on me. And here's something, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Aubrey, but this is something that some obligers feel is they feel that an expectation attaches to them personally. It's not just
Yeah.
enough to fulfill an obligation, it's that somehow it must be personal. So, for instance, I was talking
Yeah.
to a guy who said, like, my wife feels like she has to cook this big Thanksgiving meal for her whole family, and she complains about it. It's too much, and I can tell it's too much. And I keep saying to her, let's pay for a caterer. We're happy to pay for it, and then you can have fun. And she's like, no, I have to do it myself. It's like, why do you have to do it yourself? Maybe you need to delegate. Maybe
Yeah.
you need to throw money at the problem because it doesn't mean that you have to do it personally. And here's another thing to think about. This was an academic who said, well, he felt that what he was teaching in the world was so very important that anytime somebody asked him to speak about it, he felt obliged to
Wow.
speak. But then he said, well, it occurred to me, well, I'm at a place in my career where none of these speaking opportunities really is going to make a difference in my career. But for people who are younger and just starting out, these are real opportunities for them to advance their careers. And so I will say yes to them by saying no to as a speaker.
Wow.
And so it's reframing, like if you're
Yeah.
saying no, who are you saying yes to or who's benefiting? Because it is hard for obligers. And that's what I don't like when people are like, well, just draw a boundary. I'm like, that's not
Yeah.
helpful. An obliger can't just say, oh, I'm going to draw a boundary.
Mhm. Yeah.
What does that even mean to an obliger?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 100%. Those exact tools have been so useful for me, but I don't think I think they're workarounds that I've sort of naturally fallen into, and
Yes, yes.
it's so helpful to use them on purpose. I just love that part.
I wonder if, and I know we're getting close to the end here. There's so much more that we talk about, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the interaction of the different tendencies in
Yes.
intimate relationship.
Hmm.
You mentioned a couple times that you're married to a questioner. I
Yeah.
would imagine as an upholder that that's sort of navigable. I'm wondering if you were married to a rebel, for instance, if that would just be
Mm.
impossible. If
Hmm.
somebody's listening to this and thinking, oh, well, I'm such and such, and my partner is such and such, that's not really working. Like how can they work through potentially some of those issues to the extent that they want to?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because if you imagine the four tendencies as four overlapping like a Venn diagram, each tendency overlaps with two tendencies. So an upholder overlaps with questioners because they both readily meet inner expectations, and upholder also overlaps with obliger because they both readily meet outer expectations. And so even within your tendency, you can sort of tip one way or the other, and that's going to color your tendency. But you're right. Like upholder and questioner tends to be a very, very stable one because they both meet inner expectations and sort of understand the weight of that. And I feel like for an upholder who might too readily meet expectations, it's helpful to have a questioner. And then questioners appreciate the fact that upholders are just doing all this stuff. As I mentioned, obliger is the tendency that matches up the most easily with all the three. So that tends to work well. If there is a rebel, and you see this in romance, but you also see it in a work situation. Let's say you have a founding partners. If one person is a rebel, usually the other person is an obliger. That is by far the most stable. And you're right. Like, I think the hardest one to manage is upholder and rebel because they just see the world in such different ways. Like rebels tend to value spontaneity, whereas upholders don't like spontaneity at all. They just bring such a different perspective to it. That that can be hard to manage. Now, I would never say never because I've seen every single combination. But I do think that it's helpful to understand somebody else's perspective, and it often will explain certain conflicts that come up over and over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one more faith question that I'd love for you to comment on. I was having lunch with a friend recently. We were talking about that she's a questioner, and so she said that's in some ways has been a little bit disruptive to her faith. The history of the church and social issues, there are things that feel very important and heavy to her. And so and she's having this epiphany because she was talking with her siblings who are upholders, and it was like they finally sort of pinned the disconnect. Why to so much of her family these feel like non-issues. To them it was like, I don't know, we're doing this good thing and we love it and let's just, carry on. And to her, it feels like there's really a problem here that is really important that we all need to talk about. And I think that a lot of people are probably familiar with that kind of dynamic within families, that especially around issues that feel really important, that maybe you're organizing your life around, like your faith. So I'd love for you to just talk about how doubt affects each of these tendencies, and like how do you navigate that in a community where what you value or what feels important to you might actually genuinely be different. It's almost like the reality that you're living in feels different, even though you're looking at the same facts.
And it is. I mean, that is the fact. We all live in our own little universe, and we think that other people are seeing what we see and hearing what we hear, and they just aren't. Like, they're just,
Yeah.
it's wild to me how differently people can see something just from a different perspective. And I think it's really important to recognize. I think that sometimes, and maybe this is particularly true of obligers, I wanted to say this earlier, is like sometimes as an obliger, you might think other people are so inconsiderate. I would be there for you. Why aren't you here for me? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that, well, to an upholder or questioner or rebel, like they're not being inconsiderate. They just see something in a very
Yes.
different light. And so instead of feeling like, oh, I'm really hurt, it's kind of like, well, it's sort of annoying that you're doing this, but I understand where you're coming from. And so it can again frame it in a way that's impersonal. I do wonder, and again, I had this is just what I think is that for questioners, this why is really, really important. And so if you say, well, this is the rule, then it's like, well, why is that the rule? Where is the origin of that rule? They do often, a friend of mine described this as the black hole of research, which is it just sucks you in. And this desire for more and more and more information is something that questioners really tends to resonate with questioners. And so that is the kind of thing where they might really get drawn into those questions. Whereas for
Yeah.
someone of a different tendency, they just don't have that same inclination. Now, that's not to say that people of all the tendencies might not have these questions of faith and really pursue these deep questions. But I do think that it is kind of the questioner way to pursue everything that they
Yeah.
might want to have more information about.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Do you think, and I'm curious if this came up at all in your research, but I wondered if there are practices that seem to resonate with particular tendencies. Like we have a wide spectrum of ways to worship, being out in nature or singing in a choir or
Mm.
praying or ritual, coming together in community. And I wonder if you've found that there are practices that really resonate with particular tendencies that could feel, authentic and aligned.
That is such a fascinating question. I don't know. Like, observe this and report back to me. I would love to know. I do think that for obligers, if there is a practice that they want to pursue, there does need to be that outer accountability.
Yeah.
So, for example, I remember talking to a woman who she wanted to get up early in the morning, and but she lived by herself. But another thing that she wanted to do is she wanted to read scripture every day. And so she made a deal with her mother. They would at a phone call at like 7:30 a.m. They would pray for each other, read, and then go about their
Oh,
day. So she got up early, connected with her mother, and did this spiritual reading every day. So it was like win, win, win.
yeah.
But she needed that outer accountability because it's
Yeah.
like not only was she not getting up on time, she was also not doing the daily spiritual reading that she wanted to do. She had to build in that accountability. So again, if it's a certain kind of practice, an obliger would want to create some kind of external
Yeah.
accountability. Then I can imagine that for questioners study, that could be something that would be deeply satisfying to them. Rebels kind of doing something in their own way. They will often do something in kind of a quirky way. So I could imagine them coming up with some kind of spiritual practice that no one's heard of before, or doing it in a really challenging way. But I don't know. That's a really, really interesting
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, this is all so interesting. For someone for a faith leader who's listening to this and they're thinking like, "Oh my gosh, now I feel a little bit paralyzed. I know that there are
Yes.
all of these people in my congregation and I don't want to push anyone away by
Yeah.
saying something that's going to make it hard for them to choose to engage."
Yes.
Is there a fail-safe way to communicate with a group that that is most likely to invite people in and not shut people down?
That is such a great question. And I get that all the time because people are like, I don't have time to tailor my message
Yeah.
in all these different ways. I will say this, here's the most brilliant message. It's a public service announcement from decades ago. It hasn't been used officially in such a long time, and yet we all
Okay.
remember it because it's so powerful. And it's because it in one line, it inspires upholders, questioners, obligers, rebels, and it's only you can prevent forest fires.
Yeah.
Upholder, questioner, obliger, rebel. Only you can prevent forest fires. I think that when you're talking, you want to try to hit the notes. Why is what you're doing going to matter to other people? Why is it going to affect other people? If you do what I'm suggesting that you do, others will benefit. And others are relying on you to do that. And then also to explain why we're asking you to do this, and this is why we're asking you to do it.
Yeah.
If we're raising money, this is why we're asking for the money. If we're asking for your time, this is why we need this much time in this way. Um, Upholders probably are the people that are just going to go ahead and do it, and they're also pretty good at saying no when they're
Mm,
overtaxed, because they're like,
yeah.
well, if I say yes to you, I'm not going to be able to keep my other obligations, so I got to say no. And then the rebel, it's really to remind people, but this is what you want. This is what you choose. And you're going to choose it all over again. And
Mm.
I think to upholders, questioners, and obligers, this idea of constantly choosing sounds exhausting. I don't want to keep choosing. I want to choose once and then just go about my business and just execute. But to a rebel, this is really powerful that you are choosing.
Yeah.
And that is what you want. Another thing is to be aware of how different people might be burdened differently. Like remembering, well, the upholders might really lock on to something, so don't throw
Yeah.
out a standard. Questioners, they need to have their reasons. Don't just say something that's arbitrary.
Yeah.
Obligers, don't load the very people who are the most likely to say yes. Don't just keep going back to them because everybody else kind of squawks and they're the ones that cooperate. That's not fair. And then the rebels, remember, they may go about it in their own way, but one of the things is that rebels are often drawn to the military, the police, and the
Really?
clergy, and large corporations with lots of rules. Often they are drawn to areas of lots of rules because they find
Wow.
that like they push against those rules. The military has figured out how to work with rebels. They got a
Wow.
lot of ways to get the best out of rebels. And so part of it is, there's all that rebel energy. And going to, find a way to tap into that because they can do anything they want once they decide they
Yeah.
want to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Gretchen. This has been such a fun conversation. Your work is so fascinating and insightful. Is there anything else you'd want to leave us with?
I think that it's just, there's no one best tendency.
Yeah.
There's no, it's like they're all good and they're all bad. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. It's not a matter of, oh, I wish I were this one or that one. It's more like, given what's true about me, how do I create an environment where I thrive? And given all the people that are around me, how do I help create an environment where they can thrive?
Yes.
That's perfect.
Thank you so
again,
much. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I so enjoyed it.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Gretchen Rubin. If you want to go deeper into the Four Tendencies or explore more of Gretchen's work, you can check out her book, The Four Tendencies, or her other bestsellers, The Happiness Project and Better Than Before. She also hosts an award-winning podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where she and her sister dive into practical ways to build habits, boost happiness, and live with more intention. We'll link to all of those in the show notes. Thanks again for listening.